Imagine living in the shadow of history's most famous queens, your story overlooked and your legacy forgotten. But what if there's more to Henry VIII's marital history than Anne and Catherine? Join us as we bring to light the incredible lives of Henry VIII's lesser-known wives, giving voice to the women who truly impacted the Tudor court. Their unique journeys will captivate and surprise you. The world of the Tudor court is often told through a narrow frame, shaped by the known drama of Henry VIII and the 6 marriages that have overshadowed nearly every other story from his reign. These marriages are usually reduced to a simple pattern of rise and fall, and it becomes easy to forget that each woman pulled into the orbit of this restless king lived a life that stretched far beyond the moment she entered his chamber or the day she left it. When people speak of these marriages, they often stop at the loudest facts. They may talk about the break from Rome, the charges of treason, the trials, the annulments, and the many steps Henry took to get what he wanted. What gets lost are the quieter days that came before and after, shaped by a court that was rich, watchful, and dangerous. The women who became his wives were not simple figures put into place to satisfy a king. They were daughters, sisters, scholars, diplomats, political shields, cultural bridges, and in some cases, survivors whose real histories still hide under the shadows left behind by Henry's decisions. When we look past the common stories, a different world appears. These women existed in a court filled with eyes that watched every step. Their movements, words, and choices could be read as ambition or loyalty, and a single wrong moment could change their fate. They were taught to obey men since childhood, yet many of them carried their own sense of purpose. Some were trained to read and write with care. Some learned to hold their place in foreign courts. Some knew how to negotiate alliances. Some understood how to read the twists of court politics better than many of the men around them. They were not all the same, and they cannot be reduced to the short phrases that people still repeat about them. Each life must be read as part of a larger world that is often ignored. There is a central question that rises when we look at all of this with fresh eyes. Who were these women before history folded them into Henry's story, and why are their own stories so quiet even today? These questions matter because they help reveal the structure of power that shaped the Tudor era. They help us see how personal choices were often shaped by political needs, and how the pressures on royal women were different from those placed on men. They also help us see how memory can be shaped by the loudest voice in the room, even when the truth is more complicated. To understand these women, we need to move back to their early years. Many of them grew up in households where the idea of duty was fixed in their daily lives. They were raised to marry for alliance. Their families often saw them as keys that could open doors to influence or safety. A marriage into the English crown was, for many families, a prize that promised high standing. Yet it also came with risk. A woman sent to court lived with constant strain. She had to watch her words and actions with care. She had to show loyalty to the king while also keeping ties with her own people. She needed to stay alert to shifting alliances. She also had to manage the expectations placed on her as a possible mother of the next heir. These demands weighed on many of them long before they met Henry. Take the example of a young woman raised in a foreign court. She may have grown up surrounded by poets, tutors, and diplomats. She may have learned languages, history, and scripture. She may have practiced the skills needed for ceremony, including music and dance. She may have been taught how to speak with care and how to hide her thoughts when needed. When she came to England, she carried her culture with her. She also carried hopes for peace between countries. Yet once she stepped into the Tudor household, she faced new eyes and new customs. Everything she did was interpreted through the lens of English politics. For some, this shift was exciting. For others, it was isolating. The court was known for its rivalry, and newcomers were watched closely. Even women from within England faced a similar problem. They may have known the language and the customs, but the Tudor court had its own storms. Powerful families battled for influence. The rise or fall of a single courtier could change the entire balance of the household. A rumor could spread with speed. The king's favor could lift a family to high standing, but that same favor could vanish without warning. A woman who became queen faced enormous pressure to keep her place. She had to show loyalty. She had to produce heirs. She had to maintain dignity even when the court worked against her. If she stumbled, she could lose her power in an instant. If she failed to give Henry what he wanted, he could shift his attention to someone else. This environment shaped every moment of their lives. The Tudor court was filled with color, celebration, and music, but beneath the surface was constant competition. Every festival, feast, and conversation held layers of meaning. A woman might smile at a dance, speak kindly at a dinner, or exchange a simple greeting, but others might read these moments as signs of strategy. It is easy now to think of these women as passive figures, yet many of them understood the court deeply. They knew how to build alliances quietly. They knew how to use their position to support their families. They knew how to maintain friendships that helped secure their safety. They also learned when to speak and when to stay silent. Sometimes silence was the only tool they had left. Many of them also lived with fear, though they rarely spoke of it. To be queen in the Tudor era was to be both powerful and vulnerable. The crown gave a woman a high place in society, yet it also put her at the center of attention. Her private life became a public concern. Her body was watched for signs of pregnancy, and every loss was treated as a political crisis. Her friendships were studied. Her letters were sometimes read by others. If the king began to doubt her, she had very little protection. The same court that celebrated her could turn cold. The same nobles who bowed before her could stand against her if the king demanded it. The women who survived did so not only through grace but also through quiet strength. When we examine the fragments of their lives, a richer picture forms. Some of them were known for learning. Some read widely and wrote letters with care, showing thought and insight. Others were skilled in managing their households or acting as patrons of the arts. Some worked to support reforms in religion. Others tried to bring peace within the royal family. A few became guardians to stepchildren who later shaped the future of England. These acts were not loud, but they mattered. They reveal women who were more than symbols or victims. They show women with agency, even in a world that allowed them very little room to act. Yet the question remains: why do their stories remain so quiet? Part of the reason is that the loudest events of Henry's reign overshadow everything else. The break from the church, the trials, and the executions have captured the public imagination for centuries. These moments are dramatic, shocking, and easy to retell. They also give the sense that Henry was the only true actor in his own story. Another reason is that many of the records that held the voices of these women were lost or destroyed. Letters were burned. Diaries from women of the period were rare. Court records often focused on men. What survived was a picture shaped by the interests of male chroniclers who had little reason to highlight the inner lives of queens. Over time, the stories of these women became flattened into simple narratives. One became the loyal wife. One became the temptress. One became the scholar. One became the obedient one. These descriptions hide more than they reveal. They reduce rich, complex lives into small boxes that fit the needs of the moment. They also turn women into symbols of moral lessons rather than human beings shaped by their own hopes and fears. When we speak of them today, we often repeat these same patterns without knowing it. To challenge this, we can look at the environment they lived in with fresh eyes. We can consider the daily rituals of court life. We can picture the early mornings in cold stone halls, the smell of wax and rushes, the soft shuffle of servants preparing the day. We can imagine the hushed talks behind screens, the careful placement of a hand at a feast, the sound of music drifting through a gallery. We can picture a young queen trying to find her place in a court that was not her own. We can see her learning the small details that shaped power. We can see her watching the king's mood, listening to the shift in tone between courtiers, and studying the letters that arrived from home. We can also imagine the moments that were never recorded. A queen might sit at her writing table, pausing before she starts a letter that must balance honesty with caution. She might comfort a lady in her household who fears losing favor. She might walk through her private garden and think of the family she left behind. She might pray for a safe pregnancy. She might fear what the future holds if the king grows restless. None of these moments appear in most histories, yet they shaped these women as much as any political act. Their stories also remind us that power can exist in forms that are easy to overlook. A queen who showed kindness to her stepchildren could help shape their future, and through them, the future of the country. A queen who brought new ideas from abroad could influence learning in the English court. A queen who kept peace in her household could calm the king during times of tension. Even the act of survival in a court like this was a form of quiet victory. When we step back and look at their lives in full, we see a pattern of struggle and strength. These women were often trapped between their duty to the crown and their sense of self. They were expected to serve the needs of a king whose own desires shifted with time. They were required to stand with dignity even when they faced danger. They had to protect themselves without appearing to challenge authority. Some succeeded for many years. Some fell quickly. Some found peace in later life. Some left a legacy that shaped future monarchs. Yet even the ones who were not remembered by name deserve to be recognized as more than footnotes in the life of Henry. Understanding their place in Tudor history also helps us understand how easily stories can be shaped by power. When one voice becomes louder than all others, it can drown out the truth. When one figure dominates the narrative, those around him can become blurred. This is why it is important to look again. It is important to see that the Tudor court was not just Henry's stage. It was a world filled with individuals whose lives were shaped by duty and fate. The women who married Henry were part of this world in ways that were both profound and dangerous. Their stories are also a reminder that history is not fixed. New research and new perspectives continue to uncover details that were once overlooked. Letters once ignored have been re-examined. Accounts written by women of the period have gained new attention. Scholars have looked more closely at the cultural and political background that shaped each marriage. These efforts help restore depth to lives that were flattened by simple retellings. They also help us see that history is built not only on grand events but also on small, quiet moments that shape the human experience. If we continue to explore these hidden corners, we can begin to understand how these women moved through a world filled with risk and opportunity. We can see how they used the tools available to them. We can recognize the courage it took to live under a crown that could raise or destroy them. Their lives remind us that the past is filled with people who faced challenges we can still relate to today. They dealt with fear, hope, disappointment, and the search for meaning in a world that often limited their choices. The shadow cast by Henry's power may have hidden their voices, but it did not erase them. When we look deeper, their stories come into view. We see women who were far more than symbols of marriage and fate. They were participants in a world that tested them at every turn. They navigated a court where loyalty could shift overnight. They learned to read the mood of a king whose desires were unpredictable. They balanced their personal hopes with the demands of a crown that asked more of them than it ever gave. They lived within a system that gave them little control, yet many of them found ways to shape their lives with dignity. As we uncover their lives, we move closer to understanding the full story of the Tudor age. These women were not forgotten because they lacked importance. They were forgotten because the narrative that survived favored power, drama, and the voice of the crown. When we bring their stories back into focus, we gain a clearer view of the past. We see not only the loud moments of history but also the quiet strength that often lies behind them. Jane Seymour entered the Tudor world at a moment when the court still vibrated with the sharp aftershocks of Anne Boleyn's fall. The palace corridors that once echoed with the rush of ambition and the clamor of reform now carried a quieter tension. Servants spoke with care, ladies watched one another with measured eyes, and every whisper seemed to carry the weight of recent tragedy. Out of this uneasy calm, Jane began her rise, one that appeared modest on the surface but carried deep consequence. Her path to the crown was shaped by patience, timing, and a steady temperament that contrasted sharply with the storm that had come before her. Although many early accounts paint her as gentle and reserved, the truth behind her ascent holds more complexity. She understood the world she was entering, even if she moved through it softly. Jane was born into a family that balanced loyalty with cautious ambition. She grew up far from the center of court power, surrounded by the rhythms of a household that valued service and respect for order. Her education was modest compared to the scholarly training some royal women received, yet she gained a strong understanding of household management, ceremony, and the expectations placed upon noble daughters. While she did not enter the court with the sparkle of a foreign princess or the fluency of a well-traveled noblewoman, she brought a steadiness that became her defining strength. When she joined the household of Queen Catherine and later served in Boleyn, she observed two very different models of queenship. She watched how loyalty could shape a queen's legacy, and she saw how strong will could provoke suspicion in a court where men held most of the power. These early lessons shaped her manner and prepared her for the steps she would later take. Her quiet presence attracted Henry's attention at a moment when his own confidence was shaken. He had hoped for a fresh beginning with Anne, but the marriage that once burned with excitement had soured under pressure. The lack of a male heir cast a shadow across every conversation, every feast, and every council meeting. Anne's boldness, once alluring, became a source of irritation for a king who believed his authority should never be questioned. Into this atmosphere stepped Jane, carrying herself with modest composure. She did not push herself forward, nor did she resist the king's gaze. Instead, she allowed the moments between them to grow naturally, or at least to seem that way. Many at court viewed her as a figure of innocence, untouched by the schemes that often shaped royal households. Yet those who knew the inner workings of the Seymour family understood that her rise was not only the result of chance. The Seymour brothers held positions at court that allowed them to observe the king's shifting moods. They recognized the disappointment that had been building in him, and they saw in Jane a possible answer to the king's growing dissatisfaction. This does not mean Jane was merely placed before Henry without thought or agency. She knew what it meant when the king showed favor. She understood how quickly a woman's life could change if she accepted his attention. The memory of Anne's fall was fresh, and Jane would have been well aware of the danger that came with entering the king's orbit. Still, she did not turn away from the path before her. Instead, she embraced a role that combined duty, personal resolve, and a careful reading of the king's needs. The image often repeated about Jane is that she was the opposite of and in every way. While this is a convenient contrast, it simplifies her character. She did not build her influence by being passive. She made choices, though she made them with a calm expression and a gentle manner. When Henry sent her a purse of money early in their courtship, she refused it and asked that he act with honor. This moment is often cited as evidence of purity, but it also reveals a keen understanding of court politics. By refusing the gift, she signaled that she would not be treated as a mistress. She drew a boundary that elevated her standing in the king's eyes and presented herself as a woman worthy of the crown. This was not naive compliance. It was an act of quiet strategy. Jane's most significant move came not through words but through the stillness she maintained as the world around her shifted. While Anne's enemies gathered evidence to bring the queen down, Jane stayed close to her family and avoided any gesture that could be seen as triumph. She did not openly celebrate the king's growing favor. She did not take steps that could make her appear complicit in Anne's fall. Instead, she moved with care, allowing events to unfold while keeping her own position safe. This restraint gave her an air of innocence that shielded her from suspicion. It also gave Henry something he desperately wanted, a sense of comfort after years of turmoil. When Anne's execution created a sudden vacancy, Jane stepped into the role of queen with a mixture of caution and purpose. Her marriage to Henry took place quickly, and the court shifted into a new rhythm. While the king seemed relieved to begin again, the courtiers watched Jane with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. They wondered how she would define her rule. They wondered if she would follow the example of Catherine's patience or Anne's boldness. Jane chose a path that balanced tradition with quiet firmness. She restored the formal dignity that had marked Catherine's household. She placed emphasis on modesty, decorum, and stability. These choices brought calm to the court, and they also strengthened her image as a queen who could heal the wounds of past years. Jane's political influence, though subtle, was not insignificant. She used her position to advocate for reconciliation between Henry and his eldest daughter, Mary. This act required courage, for Mary had long refused to accept the changes the king made during his marriage to Anne. Bringing father and daughter together helped restore a sense of order within the royal family. It also enhanced Jane's moral standing, presenting her as a figure of compassion and unity. She was not outspoken in council meetings, nor did she push bold reforms, but she recognized that strengthening family bonds would support the stability of the throne. Her efforts succeeded to a degree that surprised even her critics. Mary's reconciliation with her father, though not perfect, gave Jane a small but meaningful victory. Despite her gentle image, Jane also made a bold request early in her queenship when she asked Henry to forgive the participants of a rebellion in the north. Her plea reflected her desire to reduce bloodshed and ease tensions in the kingdom. Henry reacted with anger, warning her not to involve herself in matters of state. Jane retreated, but the moment reveals a greater complexity in her character. She was not afraid to use her voice, though she learned quickly where the boundaries of Henry's tolerance lay. Her attempt to act as a peacemaker, even in the face of royal displeasure, demonstrates a moral strength often overlooked in her story. Her greatest challenge came through her pregnancy. The pressure to produce a male heir had weighed heavily on Henry's previous marriages, and the absence of a son had reshaped the course of the kingdom. When Jane became pregnant, the court held its breath. Her condition became the central focus of every conversation, from the kitchens to the council chambers. Henry treated her with great care during these months, viewing her as the woman who might finally give him what he long desired. Jane understood the weight of expectation placed upon her, and she approached her pregnancy with the same quiet resolve that marked her rise. She did not seek public attention. She did not boast or show fear. Instead, she carried herself with steady calm, aware that her entire future depended on the child she carried. When her son was born, Henry's joy filled the court with celebration. Jane had succeeded where others had not. She became the mother of a prince, the fulfillment of the king's hope and the key to securing the Tudor line. For a brief time, she held a place in Henry's heart that no other queen had fully achieved. Yet this triumph came at a cost. The strain of childbirth left her weakened, and complications soon threatened her life. As the court shifted from celebration to quiet dread, Jane remained composed. Her final days were marked by a calm acceptance that seemed in keeping with the steady nature she had shown from the beginning of her journey. Her death struck Henry deeply. The king who had cast aside wives with ease now faced the loss of the woman who had given him his long-awaited son. Jane's passing created a silence in the court that felt different from the unease of earlier years. This silence held grief rather than fear. Henry's mourning for Jane shaped how he viewed every marriage that followed. He believed she had been the perfect wife, the one who had brought him peace after years of turmoil. Her memory became an ideal that no future queen could match. This belief added pressure to the search for a new partner, driven not only by the need for political alliances but also by the king's longing to recover a sense of calm that had died with her. Jane's legacy extended beyond the child she bore. Her death created a shift in the king's approach to marriage that influenced the choices he made for the rest of his life. He sought companionship, alliance, and emotional reassurance, but none of the women he married after Jane held the same place in his memory. Jane became a figure of purity and loyalty in the king's mind, a memory that he guarded with near reverence. While his earlier marriages had been shaped by passion, rivalry, and conflict, the marriages that followed Jane were shaped by comparison to her quiet steadiness. This longing for the calm she once provided influenced Henry's decisions and added complexity to the lives of the queens who followed. Her rise, though subtle, changed the direction of Tudor history. She helped bring the king's eldest daughter back into the fold, she restored a sense of dignity to the royal household, and she gave birth to the prince who would one day rule the kingdom. Yet her story remains shaded by the tragedy of her early death, which ended her influence before she could shape the long-term course of the realm. Even so, her presence continued to echo through the court. Her son, raised without the mother who had given him life, became the center of political maneuvering and hope. Her brothers, elevated by their sister's marriage, gained influence that would later shape the rule of her young son. Jane may have lived quietly, but her impact on the kingdom was significant. Although her time as queen was brief, her story remains one of the most compelling examples of how power could be shaped by calm resolve rather than loud ambition. She navigated the dangers of the Tudor world with care, using her understanding of the king's needs to build a stable position for herself. She approached her role with dignity, showing a sense of responsibility that helped heal some of the wounds left by earlier conflicts. Her life reflects the complex balance of vulnerability and agency that many women faced in the Tudor court. She moved through a world that demanded obedience while offering little protection, yet she found a path that allowed her to leave a lasting mark. As her story blends into the larger narrative of the Tudor era, the connection to the women who came before and after her becomes clear. Each queen faced the same crown yet encountered it differently. Each brought her own strengths, fears, and hopes into a court shaped by uncertainty. Jane's brief time on the throne stands as a reminder that influence does not always require bold strokes or loud proclamations. Sometimes it emerges through steady presence, quiet steps, and the ability to read the shifting ground beneath one's feet. Her rise remains an essential chapter in the broader story of the shadowed wives of the Tudor monarchy, linking the turmoil that came before her to the new struggles that would follow in the wake of her death. Anne of Cleves entered the Tudor world at a turning point in Henry's life, when the memory of Jane Seymour still lingered and the weight of securing England's political future pressed on every decision he made. Jane's death had left an emptiness that Henry could not ignore. He mourned her deeply, yet the need for alliance and stability forced him to consider marriage again. The realm faced uncertainty abroad, as relationships with major powers shifted with each treaty, each rebellion, and each whispered rumor. Henry needed a bride who could help secure England's position in a Europe filled with rising tensions. Out of this landscape came the plan for a union with the Duchy of Cleves, a region whose leaders were seen as valuable partners in balancing the growing influence of powerful Catholic states. This alliance offered the promise of security and strength, and the chosen bride, Anne of Cleves, became the key to that strategy. Before she even set foot in England, Anne's fate was shaped by political needs rather than personal choice. Her upbringing in the ducal court of Cleves had prepared her for a life guided by duty. She was raised to follow the customs of her homeland, which valued modesty, quiet discipline, and traditional education for daughters of noble families. Unlike many women raised in humanist circles, she did not spend her youth studying languages or musical arts. Her training centered on household management, embroidery, and the values of dignity and obedience. This background shaped her into a young woman who carried herself with seriousness and reserve. When diplomats began to consider her as a possible bride for the English king, these qualities were presented as signs of steadiness, suitable for a queen who could bring calm to Henry's troubled personal life. Hans Holbein was sent to capture her likeness, and the portrait he produced played no small role in shaping Henry's expectations. The king saw in the painting a woman of gentle beauty and composed refinement. The smooth lines, serene expression, and careful posture suggested someone who could restore order and peace. Henry, still mourning Jane yet driven by political necessity, allowed himself to believe that this match could bring both alliance and a sense of renewal. The negotiations moved forward, shaped by diplomats who understood the importance of this union. The contract was signed with great ceremony, and preparations began for Anne's journey to England. As she traveled, and carried with her the hopes of her family and the expectations of a kingdom eager for a queen who could strengthen its position in Europe. She crossed borders, escorted by retinues who ensured her safety and kept watch over every stage of the journey. When she approached England, the anticipation grew, and the court prepared for her arrival with elaborate plans. Henry, eager to embrace his new bride and perhaps rekindle the excitement he once felt in his earlier marriages, decided to greet her in disguise, imagining a moment of romance and recognition. What followed, however, became one of the most famous missteps of his reign. When Henry entered Anne's chambers dressed as a member of her entourage, expecting her to recognize his importance even in humble attire, she greeted him politely but without special attention. She did not know the English custom of romantic disguise, and she had never met Henry before. To her, he was simply a stranger entering her space. Her lack of reaction stunned the king, who had hoped for a display of admiration or at least a spark of interest. This misunderstanding set the tone for everything that followed. The king left the room feeling deeply insulted, muttering that she was nothing like the woman he had seen in Holbein's portrait. And, unaware of the king's expectations, could not have predicted the effect of this simple moment. When Henry saw her again without disguise, in a more formal setting, his disappointment only grew. The serene face he had admired in the portrait did not match the reality he encountered. Whether the fault lay in the painter's flattery, the king's unrealistic hopes, or the difference in standards of beauty between Cleves and England, the result was the same. Henry declared privately that he felt no attraction to her. He made these feelings known to his closest advisers, who were horrified. The diplomatic alliance was already sealed. To withdraw from the marriage now would endanger England's political position and risk open conflict. With little choice, Henry proceeded with the wedding, though he did so reluctantly and with growing resentment. For Anne, the wedding day must have been filled with confusion. She had come to England in good faith, prepared to fulfill her duty as queen. She knew the importance of this union and the expectations placed upon her. Yet from the outset she sensed the king's coldness. Rumors spread quickly in the court, and Anne soon learned that Henry felt deceived by her appearance. She found herself in a position of immense vulnerability. She was alone in a foreign country, its customs different from her own, surrounded by courtiers who watched her closely for any misstep. Her natural reserve, shaped by her upbringing, made it difficult for her to adapt quickly to the shifting moods of the English court. Henry, unable to reconcile his disappointment with the political necessity of the union, sought ways to end the marriage as soon as possible. He complained to his physicians, his counselors, and anyone he trusted that he could not bring himself to consummate the marriage. He hinted that he believed she was not what he had been promised. He even claimed she lacked the grace and charm he sought in a wife. These complaints, repeated many times, fueled his desire to avoid any intimacy with her. For Anne, the king's behavior must have been baffling. She attempted to fulfill her duties, greeting English visitors with politeness and learning new customs with dedication, yet nothing she did softened Henry's opinion. The comedic aspect of this affair comes from the staggering degree of miscommunication between the two. Cultural differences played a significant role in their inability to understand one another. Anne did not speak English and relied on translators. She did not know the courting traditions that Henry valued. She approached marriage with the seriousness expected in her homeland, while Henry looked for expressions of admiration and passion. The tragic side of this miscommunication lies in the fact that Anne was blamed for expectations she never knew she was meant to meet. Henry's counselors scrambled to find a solution that would free the king from the marriage without damaging England's alliance. They searched for legal grounds that could justify an annulment. The king claimed that the marriage had not been consummated, and this claim, though humiliating for Anne, became the foundation for ending the union. She was called upon to confirm details that touched the most private parts of her life, forced to answer questions that no woman would wish to face in public. Yet through all of this, she maintained her composure. She understood that resistance could lead to disaster, not only for herself but also for her family. What makes Anne's story remarkable is not the failed marriage but the wisdom she showed in navigating its collapse. Instead of fighting the annulment, she approached the situation with clear eyes. She saw how Henry's disappointment had evolved into determination, and she knew that resisting him would place her in danger. At the same time, she recognized the opportunity before her. If she cooperated, she could negotiate terms that would give her security and freedom. If she refused, she risked losing everything. Her choices reveal a shrewd understanding of her position and an ability to act with calm strategy. When the annulment was finalized, she accepted the title of the king's sister, a designation that allowed her to remain in England with high status. She received generous estates, including properties that secured her financial independence. These lands gave her a steady income, allowing her to live with comfort and dignity. For a woman who had come to England expecting a crown, the outcome could have felt like humiliation. Instead, Anne embraced her new status with grace. She built a household that became known for its warmth and hospitality. She learned the language, adapted to English customs, and gained the respect of many nobles who admired her resilience. Henry's treatment of and after the annulment was surprisingly kind, especially compared to his treatment of other wives. He visited her at times, speaking with her more warmly than he ever had during their brief marriage. He sent her gifts, invited her to important events, and ensured her comfort. Part of this kindness may have stemmed from relief that she had accepted the annulment without resistance. Another part may have come from guilt or respect. Whatever his reasons, Anne became one of the few women in Henry's life who managed to escape his wrath entirely. Her life after the annulment defied expectations for a discarded queen. She could have returned home, but she chose to stay in England, where she found a sense of belonging that did not require royal duties or political pressure. She lived quietly, yet she remained connected to the royal family. She attended court on certain occasions, often treated with friendliness by those who admired her calm strength. She maintained friendships with women in the court and sometimes interacted with Henry's children, who saw her as a gentle and steady presence. Her story stands out because it reveals a woman who survived a political storm not through dramatic rebellion but through quiet resilience. She understood how to protect herself in a world where a single misstep could end a life. Her ability to negotiate favorable terms for herself shows a sharpness often overlooked in traditional accounts. Many expected her to act as a pawn throughout her entire life, shaped solely by the wishes of men and diplomats. Instead, she emerged from the chaos with independence and respect, something few women in her position could claim. Anne's life also reveals the unpredictable nature of power in the Tudor court. Henry, who had forced queens aside with ruthless resolve, met in and a woman who did not challenge him yet did not allow despair to define her. She chose acceptance over resistance, stability over pride, and understanding over fear. These choices gave her a long and comfortable life in England, a life that allowed her to watch the monarchy shift and evolve long after she had left the throne. Her story connects naturally to the legacy of Jane Seymour, whose calm presence shaped Henry's expectations for queenship after her death. Jane had brought the king a sense of peace, and Henry's longing for that peace made him more sensitive to disappointment. Anne's inability to match the image Henry held in his mind contributed to the failure of their union, yet the strength she showed afterward reflects that same theme of quiet resilience. Both women, though different in background and experience, reveal how the Tudor court often rewarded those who navigated its dangers with steady hands and a deep understanding of their place within a system designed to limit their choices. Anne's life serves as a reminder that not all stories of Henry's queens end in tragedy. Some end in survival shaped by wisdom and adaptability. Her tale bridges the turmoil left by Jane's passing with the new uncertainties that awaited the next queen, reflecting once more how each woman who entered Henry's life carried her own strength, her own struggles, and her own way of facing a world that demanded more than it ever gave in return. Catherine Howard entered Henry's life at a moment shaped by the quiet aftershocks of Anne of Cleves's departure, a moment when the king sought comfort more than strategy and longed for the warmth he believed had slipped from his reach after Jane Seymour's death. Anne's graceful acceptance of the annulment had provided Henry with relief, yet it also left a hollow space, a reminder that diplomacy alone could not satisfy his personal hunger for affection. Into this space stepped a young woman whose charm and bright spirit offered something the king had not felt in years. Catherine Howard's youth, her light laughter, and the way she moved through the court with an ease shaped by her upbringing created a vivid contrast to the measured reserve of Anne of Cleves. The court, still adjusting to the surprising calm of Anne's post-marriage life, now found itself observing a new queen whose presence felt like the first notes of a song after a long silence. Catherine came from a noble yet financially strained branch of the Howard family, a household known for its influence as well as its internal faults. Her early years were marked by a mixture of privilege and neglect. She was raised in the home of her step-grandmother, where many young girls lived under one roof, educated loosely and supervised unevenly. This environment was less structured than the disciplined courts of Europe, and Catherine's days were filled with music, dance, and the ordinary mischief of youth. She was not prepared for the rigid expectations of a royal court, nor for the sharp eyes that watched every gesture and every whisper. Yet she carried with her a natural liveliness that drew attention without effort, a charm that made those around her feel alive in her presence. When she joined the household of Anne of Cleves, her presence brought energy to the ladies around her. She dressed with care, danced with grace, and spoke with a sweetness that felt refreshing in a court burdened by political strain. These qualities did not go unnoticed by the king. Henry, aging and troubled by physical pain, found in Catherine a sense of youth that reminded him of the vigor he once possessed. Her smile seemed to lift his spirits, and her gentle attentions gave him the impression of renewed desirability. He had spent years navigating the disappointments of marriage, first through the fiery collapse of Anne Boleyn's union, then through the fragile hope and tragic loss of Jane Seymour, and finally through the awkward silence that marked his short-lived marriage to Anne of Cleves. Catherine appeared to him as a new beginning, a bright thread woven into a fabric worn thin by grief and frustration. The king's affection for her grew quickly, and Catherine, swept into the rising tide of his favor, soon found herself at the center of attention. Her family recognized this change and moved swiftly to support her ascent. They had long sought to strengthen their influence, and Catherine's position offered an opportunity to restore the Howard name to the center of power. Yet Catherine herself may not have fully grasped the weight of what was happening. She enjoyed being admired. She enjoyed the gifts the king presented to her. She enjoyed the feeling of being chosen. But the distance between pleasure and responsibility was one she did not yet understand. Her marriage to Henry transformed her from a lively young noblewoman into the Queen of England, a shift that would challenge even the most experienced courtier. Catherine stepped into this role with enthusiasm, but not with wisdom. She brought joy to the king's life, offering him comfort and affection at a time when he felt the burdens of age more keenly than ever. Her laughter filled the halls once marked by tension. She organized dances, encouraged music, and surrounded herself with companions who shared her youthful spirit. For a short while, the court felt lighter. Henry smiled more, his temper softened, and the sense of renewal lifted both courtiers and servants alike. Yet beneath the bright surface of Catherine's early queenship lay a truth that would threaten everything she had gained. Her past, shaped by the carelessness of youth and the loose supervision of her upbringing, contained relationships that would later be seen as grave offenses. These earlier connections were not unusual for girls raised in such environments, where young men and women interacted more freely than the strict ideals of court morality allowed. Yet the Tudor court held queens to a higher standard, expecting purity not only in the present but in the past. Catherine, unaware of how dangerous these memories could become, stepped onto the throne without concealing the shadows that followed her. Her household included many who knew her past. Some wished her well. Others saw opportunity. Still others carried resentments or grudges. Rumors began to swirl, quiet at first, then louder as time passed. Henry, blinded by affection, heard only the voices that praised Catherine. He saw her as the rose without a thorn, a phrase that captured the ideal he wished her to be. He needed her to represent youth, beauty, and innocence. In her he sought the comfort that had slipped through his grasp with each previous marriage. This idealized image made her downfall all the more devastating. As Catherine settled into her role, she continued to surround herself with familiar faces, some of whom posed dangers she did not recognize. She chose as her companions young women who shared her past experiences, creating an atmosphere that sometimes felt more like the lively household of her youth than the solemn dwelling of a queen. Within this circle, she also allowed contact with certain men who had known her before the crown, unaware that even the faintest hint of impropriety could carry fatal consequences. At the same time, the king's physical condition worsened. His leg ulcers caused him constant pain. His weight increased. His mood grew more unpredictable. In Catherine's presence, he sought relief from these discomforts, yet the strain on his body made him more vulnerable to suspicion. Courtiers who wished to gain favor or remove rivals observed Catherine closely, noting each conversation, each exchange of smiles, each movement of her household. The court, ever alert to shifts in power, watched the young queen with growing curiosity. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into warnings. These warnings soon reached ears willing to investigate. When evidence of Catherine's past came to light, it carried the force of a storm. Testimonies emerged from those who had known her in her youth. Letters were uncovered that revealed affectionate relationships predating her arrival at court. These revelations alone were damaging, but what truly sealed her fate were the accusations that she had engaged in private exchanges with a gentleman of the king's household after her marriage. Whether these interactions were innocent or something more remains debated, but the court interpreted them through the harshest lens possible. Once suspicion took root, Catherine had little chance to defend herself. The same court that had admired her charm now turned cold. Her youth, once her greatest asset, now worked against her. She lacked the experience to navigate the legal and political traps laid before her. She did not understand how to counter accusations with strategy or how to manage the shifting loyalties of those around her. When questioned, she panicked, retreating into tears and confusion. Her fear made her appear guilty in the eyes of those who sought certainty. Henry's reaction to the accusations was a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had believed her to be unblemished, the pure comfort he had longed for. The idea that she had deceived him filled him with humiliation. This humiliation, more than anything else, fueled his resolve to act. For a king who equated personal betrayal with treason against the realm, Catherine's actions were unforgivable. His grief was real, yet it was overshadowed by his sense of wounded pride. Anne Boleyn's downfall had been shaped by political motives and courtly rivalries. Catherine's downfall, in contrast, was shaped by the collision of youth and royal expectation. When Catherine was removed from the court, she entered a period of fear that few can imagine. The halls that had once echoed with her laughter now felt like cold stone. She found herself isolated in a world she had never been prepared to face. Reports describe her as devastated, unable to comprehend how quickly her life had changed. She clung to the hope that the king might show mercy, yet the machinery of the court had already shifted into motion. Her past indiscretions and her naive choices had been turned into weapons against her. The council drew up charges. The judges prepared the legal foundation for her execution. Her pleas, shaped by fear rather than strategy, could not alter her fate. In her final days, Catherine reflected the tragic blend of ambition and innocence that had shaped her rise. She had wanted to please the king. She had wanted to enjoy the life that unfolded before her. She had wanted to feel beloved. She had not sought to harm the crown or undermine the realm. Yet in the Tudor world, where purity and reputation carried life-or-death weight, her past and her missteps became fatal flaws. The court demanded a queen who fit an impossible ideal, and Catherine's humanity, with all its mistakes and vulnerabilities, could not survive that demand. Her execution marked one of the most heartbreaking moments of Henry's reign. The young queen who had danced with joy, who had lifted the king's spirits, who had seemed a symbol of renewal, now walked toward her death with trembling steps. Her final words revealed regret, fear, and a sense of sorrow that extended beyond her own life. She had wanted to be the perfect wife for the king, yet she had not understood what that role required. Her youth, which had once charmed Henry, now underscored the tragedy of her fate. Her story connects directly to and of Clovis's survival and the quiet strength she displayed. Anne's wisdom had protected her, guiding her to accept a new role with dignity. Catherine lacked that guidance. She lacked experience, protection, and strategic awareness. Her story illustrates how dangerous the Tudor world could be for those who entered it unprepared. It also reveals how the king's longing for affection could blind him to the real challenges of the court, creating expectations that no young woman could meet. Catherine Howard's life and death serve as a reminder that the Tudor court valued purity over truth, appearance over understanding, and control over compassion. She became a symbol of what happens when ambition meets innocence in a world governed by fear and reputation. Her downfall highlights the harsh realities faced by the women who entered Henry's life, each one navigating a court where survival required more than charm or beauty. It required knowledge, caution, and an understanding of how easily affection could turn to suspicion. Her tale prepares the way for the final chapter in the story of Henry's wives, revealing once again how each woman's legacy was shaped not only by her own choices but also by the burdens placed upon her by the king, the court, and the realm itself. Catherine Parr entered the Tudor court at a moment shaped by the tragic fall of Catherine Howard, whose youth and innocence had collided with the harsh demands of royal life. The memory of that loss still lingered in the halls of the palace, creating an atmosphere filled with caution and uncertainty. Those who had witnessed Catherine Howard's downfall understood how fragile a queen's position could be, and how quickly affection could turn into suspicion. Into this tense world came a woman whose strength had been forged not through courtly games or girlish charm, but through adversity, intelligence, and a lifetime spent navigating personal upheavals. Her story offered a striking contrast to the young queen who had preceded her, reflecting a shift in the king's desires as well as the kingdom's needs. Catherine Parr was not a girl when she caught Henry's attention. She was a mature woman who had already endured 2 marriages, each shaping her understanding of responsibility, loyalty, and survival. Her first husband died when she was very young, leaving her with freedom but also with the recognition of how uncertain life could be for women dependent on alliances and family support. Her second marriage lasted longer, giving her experience as a manager of households and estates. During these years she developed skills that few royal wives possessed when they first entered the palace. She learned how to negotiate debts, supervise servants, maintain correspondence, and navigate the legal matters that arose when illness or financial tension struck. These practical experiences prepared her for the complexities of life as queen in a way that none of Henry's previous wives had been prepared. She was also well educated. Her love of learning stemmed from her mother's influence and from her own driven nature. While many noblewomen were taught reading, writing, and needlework, Catherine pursued deeper knowledge. She studied languages, theology, and history. Her curiosity pushed her toward the intellectual debates that were shaping Europe during a period of intense religious change. She read widely and reflected on the ideas that questioned old traditions and suggested new paths of faith. This intellectual foundation set her apart from Henry's other queens and would later play a central role in her life with the king. When her second husband died, Catherine found herself in a position both vulnerable and promising. She entered the household of Mary, Henry's eldest daughter, where her intelligence and measured presence soon drew notice. She first caught the interest of Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour. Their connection was warm, and Catherine hoped to marry him, believing she had finally found a match shaped by affection rather than duty. But her life changed once Henry's attention turned to her. The king was in poor health, burdened by pain, and haunted by the losses he had suffered. He no longer sought youthful beauty or passionate rebellion. Instead, he longed for stability, understanding, and the comfort of a partner who would respect his authority while tending to the deeper needs of the realm. Catherine fit that vision with an ease that surprised even her. Accepting the king's proposal was not simple. Catherine had little desire to join a marriage that had consumed so many lives. She feared for her safety and that of her family. Yet she also believed in duty. She believed she had a role to play in the realm. And she believed that if she were to become queen, she could use her influence to encourage learning, peace, and religious reflection. After careful thought, she agreed. Her decision reflected not naivete but courage. She stepped into a position many women would have refused, bringing with her a quiet resolve that would define her time as queen. Her marriage to Henry brought immediate challenges. The king's health required constant attention. His leg pain grew worse, and his moods fluctuated sharply. Catherine approached these struggles with patience. Unlike Catherine Howard, who tried to lighten his spirits through youthful charm, Catherine Parr offered companionship grounded in understanding. She sat with him during moments of pain. She read to him. She engaged him in thoughtful conversation, soothing his temper with her intelligence rather than attempting to distract him with pleasure. In return, Henry respected her in ways he had not respected his recent wives. He trusted her judgment. He valued her opinions. He relied on her to manage not only his household but also the care of his children. Catherine quickly became a steady presence in the lives of Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. She treated them not as political pawns but as young people in need of attention and affection. Her influence on Elizabeth was especially profound. Elizabeth, whose mother's fate had marked her early life with uncertainty, found in Catherine a source of stability. Catherine encouraged her education, ensuring she continued her study of languages and literature. She introduced her to theological works and engaged her in conversations that expanded her understanding of the world. Elizabeth thrived under this guidance, and many historians later noted that Catherine Parr's involvement played a key role in shaping the strong, educated woman who would become Queen of England. Catherine also worked to restore the fractured relationships between Henry and his daughters. She encouraged him to show Mary greater affection and worked quietly to ease the lingering tensions surrounding Elizabeth's legitimacy. Through patient conversation and a deep understanding of Henry's emotional needs, she helped rebuild a sense of unity within the royal family. Her efforts had long-lasting effects, contributing to the more stable environment that shaped the young heir's future. Beyond her role as stepmother, Catherine took on responsibilities that no previous queen had managed. Henry trusted her enough to appoint her as regent while he led a military campaign in France. This decision reflected a level of confidence in her leadership that he had never shown another wife. Catherine approached the task with the same careful determination she had shown throughout her life. She monitored finances, corresponded with officials, and made decisions that affected the day-to-day operations of the kingdom. Her success as regent demonstrated her capability and strengthened her standing at court, though it also stirred unease among those who felt threatened by her growing influence. Her embrace of religious reform became one of the defining aspects of her queenship. At a time when England was divided between supporters of old traditions and advocates of new ideas, Catherine stood firmly among the reform-minded. Yet she pursued change through careful persuasion rather than open confrontation. She wrote devotional works that encouraged personal reflection and faith. She gathered scholars and thinkers at court. She discussed matters of theology with the king, challenging him gently yet never disrespectfully. Her writings, unusual for a woman of her status, revealed her commitment to spiritual growth as well as her belief in the value of education for all people. But her growing influence created enemies. Conservative advisors at court feared her reformist ideas. They worried she might push the king toward changes they considered dangerous. They also resented the trust Henry placed in her. These men began seeking opportunities to diminish her power, interpreting her theological conversations with the king as challenges to his authority. They collected statements, twisted her words, and prepared accusations that could have led to her arrest. When Henry learned that these advisors planned to charge his queen with heresy, he reacted with the same mixture of anger and confusion that had shaped his responses to past threats. Catherine discovered the danger in time, and her reaction revealed the depth of her wisdom. Rather than confront the king or defend herself boldly, she approached him with humility. She told him that her discussions with him were meant to ease his mind, not to instruct him. She explained that she sought only to learn from him, not challenge him. This careful approach softened Henry's anger, turning it toward those who had plotted against her. Her ability to navigate this crisis saved her life and demonstrated her remarkable political instinct. Her survival set her apart from Henry's previous wives. While others had fallen victim to jealousy, slander, misunderstanding, or political machinations, Catherine Parr managed to maintain her position until the king's death. Her strength lay not in beauty, youthful charm, or strategic alliances, but in her intelligence, compassion, and steady resolve. She remained with Henry until the end of his life, caring for him as his health declined and offering him the comfort of a partner who understood the complexities of kingship. After Henry's death, Catherine's life continued to reflect the tension between personal desire and political pressure. With the king gone, she finally pursued her long-delayed marriage to Thomas Seymour. Their reunion was filled with affection but also troubled by complications. The political landscape following Henry's death was unstable. Factions formed around the young king, Edward. Ambitions clashed, and uncertainty shaped every decision. Catherine's marriage to Thomas placed her in the middle of these tensions, yet she remained committed to supporting Henry's children and continuing her intellectual pursuits. She brought Elizabeth into her household once more, continuing her role as a mentor. Yet her marriage to Thomas created difficulties, especially as his behavior became increasingly reckless. Catherine faced these challenges with patience, but the pressures took a toll on her health. She died shortly after giving birth to her only child, leaving behind a legacy marked by courage, intellect, and quiet determination. Catherine Parr's story stands in sharp contrast to that of Catherine Howard, yet their lives are deeply connected through the lessons the Tudor court learned from their experiences. Catherine Howard's downfall revealed the dangers of youth and unpreparedness in a world governed by secrecy and suspicion. Catherine Parr's survival showed how maturity, education, and emotional intelligence could provide protection in that same world. Together, their stories illustrate how varied the paths of Henry's queens could be, shaped not only by their own choices but by the shifting demands of a king whose desires were never simple. The lives of Henry's wives have often been reduced to a sequence of marriages marked by tragedy, but each woman carried her own story, shaped by her background, her character, and the forces that surrounded her. They were not merely victims of Henry's temper or pawns in political games. They were individuals who navigated a court filled with danger and opportunity. Their actions influenced the future of the kingdom, shaped the lives of Henry's heirs, and left traces in the cultural and religious landscape of England. Catherine of Aragon brought dignity and perseverance. Anne Boleyn introduced ideas and ambition that changed the nation's relationship with the Church. Jane Seymour offered the king the son he long desired. And of Cleves proved that wisdom could secure peace even in the face of disappointment. Catherine Howard showed how vulnerable a young woman could be in a world driven by power and reputation. Catherine Parr demonstrated how intelligence and faith could guide a queen through perilous times. Together, these women reveal the complexity of Henry's reign. Their stories highlight the tensions between desire and duty, love and politics, tradition and reform. Their lives remind us that history is not shaped only by kings and battles, but also by the quiet strength of those who lived in the shadows of the throne. Through their triumphs and tragedies, they illuminate the human drama at the heart of the Tudor court, showing how resilience, courage, and individuality could emerge even in the most dangerous circumstances.